What's going on, guys? This is Greg Ferris back here at Ferris for Fitness, and today I wanted to discuss something pretty much just talking about macronutrients, really a generic way to start finding kind of numbers that work for you. You know, I talk about macros a lot. You know, I preach that people really should hit their macros and this and that, but then I realized that I really don't have anything on my channel describing to people where to kind of start with their macros. A lot of people are just like, okay, I get the macros thing, but you know, they have no clue how to start it. So I'm going to do a kind of a two-part series. You know, it should be pretty sweet and to the point. You're not going to need a ton of background information, just a little bit. And again, I'll probably go into a little more detail than I need to for some of the beginners out there, but just pretty much setting up really generic macros for most people. Again, I'll get into some exceptions of how you can manipulate things based on your individuality, but I want to reiterate that, you know, these numbers are really kind of starting points for a lot of beginners and people that haven't tracked their stuff in the past, and then you should make the necessary changes from this, because you know it's really hard to just plug your numbers into an equation like this and you know spit out perfect macros for you. So you know, I'll go when I'm going through some of the things, I'll talk about this and that, but this will be just really generic way. If you want to start counting your macros, if you're completely new to it, this should be very helpful to, you know, finding numbers that work for you based on kind of your goals as well. So I'm going to get right into it, guys. Some prereq stuff that you guys probably need to know is that 1 gram of fat equals 9 calories. So if you have, you know, 10 grams of fat from a source, that's going to equal 90 calories, okay? 1 gram of protein equals 4 calories, and 1 gram of carbohydrate also equals 4 calories. So when you count your macros, you know, so if your macros are 50, 200, 200, you're kind of in a way also counting calories. You're just not really worried about that calorie number. You're just worried about hitting those specific macros. But that's kind of something you'll need to know when going through some of this basic math. And I should have this somewhere up on the screen as well too, to kind of help out people that are more visual. Know that stuff. I wanted to start off with just setting your calories at a mark. Again, this is going to be kind of individual from person to person, but in general, I see most people who aren't, you know, incredibly high intense athletes, or unless you just don't work out at all, most people's calories tend to fall in between 14 to 16 times their body weight. So again, I'll use the really generic example of a 200-pound male. Say if you thought you had kind of a slower metabolism, or a slower activity level, so mostly a desk job, you know, not a lot of cardio, things like that, go with the 14 number. You know, if you think you're kind of in the middle, go with the 15 number. If you do kind of a high energy expenditure, you're kind of the person that has trouble putting on weight, go with the 16 number. I feel like most people kind of fit in there. Again, it's not going to be applicable to people who are training like 2-a-days and things like that, but for the average person it works like that. So I'll give the example of a 200-pound male and multiply their body weight by 15. That would set you at a baseline of 3,000 calories. So now that you know your calorie mark, you can start setting up your grams of fat, your grams of carbohydrate, and your grams of protein. So now I'll go into the individual macronutrients and talking about which one, how I kind of like to set those up. So I definitely like to set fat first. Fat is essential. I'm not going to get into the whole, you know, unsaturated, saturated thing. Just setting up a fat number. Generally, I like to see 0.3 to 0.5 grams per pound of body weight. That little leeway there between 0.3 and 0.5, it can definitely be based on food preference. So if you're a person who likes kind of more fattier foods, go with the higher end of that fat intake. Obviously, and at the same time, I'd probably like to see females having a little bit higher fat intake than males, but again, probably not a huge difference, just something to think about. So again, I'll go with a really generic number within the middle of 0.4 grams per pound of body weight, and that gives our 200-pound male now 80 grams of fat. So he's at 3,000 calories and now 80 grams of fat. Next thing we'll do is set up protein. So again, protein is one of those things you can kind of have a range in the sense that it kind of depends on your goal. So my range I recommend for most people, again, really generically, is about 0.75 per pound of body weight to 1.25 per pound of body weight. So if you want to be on the lower end of that range, you're probably going to be a female or a male who has like a lot of body fat. So just kind of be honest with yourself, because protein needs are based off your lean body mass essentially, but it's really difficult to actually get a good measurement, so you kind of just have to be objective about it. So if you're a person who you just know you're 20-30% body fat, go with the lower end range. So if you're 300 pounds at 30% body fat, I wouldn't recommend you doing 1.25. You know, go with the 0.75, 0.8, 0.9, something around there, a little bit lower. Same thing for females. Generally, it's going to have a little bit less body or a little bit less muscle mass on their frame, so you can probably get away with that closer to closer to 0.75 per pound of body weight. And then again, the leaner you are, the more muscle you have, things like that, get closer to that 1.25. So if you're on a cutting diet, if you're 7-8% body fat, things like that, I would err on that closer to 1.25. So again, just really generic setting up numbers for our 200-pound male. I'll just put him in between at 1 gram per pound of body weight, which is super easy to remember for most people. And that of course puts him at 200 grams of protein. So now that you have your 80 grams of fat and your 200 grams of protein, you need to calculate those out to find the calories that you've used out of your base 3,000, again for our male here. So essentially we had 720 calories from fat because we had 80 grams of fat, 9 calories per gram, and then we had 800 calories from protein. We had 200 grams of protein, 4 calories per gram. So that gives us a total of 1,520 calories that we've already used up in our macros from protein and fat. So to find what you should eat for your carb intake, it's really simple. You just take out whatever remaining calories you have left in that 3,000, you subtract it, and then again you divide by 4 because there's 4 calories per gram of carbohydrate. So when we do the math on our 200-pound male, we get 1,480 calories remaining. Divide that by 4, and that's roughly 370 carbohydrates. So for a 200-pound male, we multiply his body weight by 15. We went in between the fat range with 0.3 to 0.5, we went 0.4. We went in between the protein intake of 0.75 to 1.25 to get 1 gram per pound of body weight, which is 200. And then we had the remaining calories left over, divided by 4 to get 370 carbohydrates. So his anchor macros are going to be 80 grams of fat, 370 grams of protein, and 200 grams of carbohydrate. So in part 2 of this video series, guys, I'll just briefly talk about the way that I choose to do things with people's goals, and I'll talk about how you can not be so anal about the number, the fixated exact number, and I'll talk about macro ranges, the benefits I think that go along with that.